Don't feel down, Denver. Your team is now, 1-4. But it's better than 0-5. It was never been 0-5 before. They pushed that back another year. The Broncos win 20-13 over the Chargers in L.A. at the hilarious named Rocket Field at Dignity Health Sports Park.com.net at Yahoo something. I don't know. Whatever it was. They have a really ridiculous named stadium, and they play soccer there, not football. But the Broncos come away with a win, 20-13. They get it done primarily on the ground, almost 200 yards, 191 on the ground for the Broncos, compared to 35 rushing yards allowed for the Chargers. That part, we'll get into this game, of course, the whole program long. It is a reaction Monday. Looking forward to hearing about what you think. But 35 yards, 2.2 yards a carry allowed by the Broncos. And the idea that, Melvin Gordon just didn't look ready in shape to play and he must just be rusty. Well, maybe. He averaged 2.6, but Austin Eckler, who was supposed to be really good, right? And they didn't need Melvin Gordon back. Well, he averaged 2.3. He had 7 total yards. He had 3 carries, and they went for 4 yards, 2 yards, and 1 yard, and that was his game on the ground. Now, he caught 15 balls, but it was for 86 yards, 5.7, just a bunch of dump-offs. Gordon had 4 catches, but for 7 yards, 1.8. It's been a long time since the Broncos have stuffed a 2-pronged rushing attack like that. And both of those guys are very good receivers. This was a really impressive effort from the Broncos defense. And keep this in mind. The Broncos basically had, and you're thinking about, 2 new starters, right? Maybe they had 2 new starters in Mike Purcell and in Alexander Johnson. Not really. They had 4. Because Mike Purcell started in the middle, allowing Shelby Harris to move over from the nose tackle spot, in which he's not really well cast. He's miscast as a nose tackle. I've gone over this before. If you've listened to this show over the past few weeks, I've told you that Shelby Harris, what makes him special, he can't use in the middle. The Broncos came around to that school of thinking. They put Shelby Harris in for Adam Gotsis at the end, and then they put Purcell in for Harris in the middle. That's 2 new starters. Alexander Johnson, of course, for the injured Josie Jewell. That's 3. And unfortunately, after Johnson smacked Devontae Bosby, looks like he will unfortunately miss some time with what they're terming some sort of spinal compression. Fortunately, it does not appear he'll need surgery. He will need rest and time to get better, but he's going to be out for some time. That's the understanding. And that's unfortunate collision between Johnson and Bosby. Wasn't an outrageous play. Melvin Gordon kind of slipped and fell underneath Johnson, who then hit Bosby. But that meant that Isaac Yiadom basically now, because Bryce Callahan isn't starting, became your starter too. So for the majority of the game, you had a starting lineup that included Yiadom, Johnson, Harris at end, and Purcell in the middle. That's 4 new guys that were effectively starters on defense. And not only do they hold the Chargers to 35 yards on the ground, they hold the Chargers to 211 yards passing. Phillip Rivers threw the ball 48 times for 211 yards. That's 4.4 yards a pass attempt. The Broncos averaged 6 per run. This was a phenomenal defensive effort. Really, really good. Now, maybe interestingly enough, too, is if you break down the snap count, Yiadom was the first guy they went to, but Yiadom might not be the guy going forward, because if you break down that snap count, you'll find someone a little different there. We'll hear from Vic Fangio over the course of the evening. We'll hear bits and pieces, and we'll hear his whole press conference later in the program. But Johnson and Purcell did enough to continue starting. I think, obviously. I think everybody saw that, and certainly the coaching staff did too. The question, of course, at corner, it might have actually been answered. Of course, they go to Yadam, the more experienced guy, but Yadam was in for 27 snaps. There was a guy that came in and was in for more than double that. Duke Dawson played 57 snaps, 81% of the defensive snaps. Dawson was last year's second-round pick. The Patriots traded up to get him, and then the Broncos traded to get him. Just keep that in mind. Dawson was out there 81% of the time. Plus, Malik Reed was out there in place of Bradley Chubb. So really, if you look at it, right? The old joke, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4. You had Purcell and Harris as basically guys who took over that job yesterday on the line. That's 2. 2 new linebackers, Johnson and Reed. That's 4. And then you make the argument that maybe Duke Dawson is the guy while Devontae Bosby recovers. That's 5. 5 out of your 11 guys were essentially new to this team this week when it comes to getting major snaps. And that's the kind of performance they came up with. Great job by all of the players. Great job by Ed Donatel, the defensive coordinator. And great job by Vic Fangio, who called an outstanding defensive game. This was as good a defensive game as the Broncos have played in a long time. Remember, the Chargers only got 13 points. One of the old bugaboos for the Broncos came back to haunt them, of course. The special teams game. The Chargers got 1 touchdown in this game, and it was on a punt return. An offense with Phillip Rivers, Keenan Allen, Melvin Gordon, Austin Eckler got no trips into the end zone. 0. And were held scoreless in the first half on top of that. If the Broncos hadn't coughed up that punt return to Desmond King, this game is a joke. It's 20-6, and Denver puts it in cruise control early. For those keeping track, I think 5 games in, you don't worry about it too much. For those keeping track, no sacks of Phillip Rivers. However, they did pick him off twice and recovered a fumble from Eckler. So 3 turnovers. So we don't have to worry about the Broncos don't have a sack or a turnover. They have both now. It's all covered. The other thing worth noting is the return to health of Kareem Jackson, who was able to come back and play safety where the Broncos have wanted him to play, and he was electric. Johnson and Jackson might have been the best 2 players on the field yesterday. And Philip Lindsay, by the way, was tremendous. But this defensive performance, what we saw here, an offense that was middling, right? In the end, the Broncos scored 20. It's not like they went bonkers. 2 touchdowns, 2 field goals. Not out of control. It's not like they raised their average per game an immense amount. But the defense led them to the win. And this is what the Broncos hoped for and expected when they were developing their roster all offseason. Go back to having a ferocious defense and an offense that can just get you enough. I'll contend that this offensive performance isn't going to be enough to get the Broncos a lot of wins. It's just not. The running game was great. That was outstanding. And that's the way the Broncos will win, mind you. They're not going to win games, not very many, with Joe Flacco flinging it around 48 times like Phillip Rivers did. Amazingly, even with all the running, the Broncos did not have time of possession. You would have thought that they'd have it by a mile. They didn't. It was about as close as you can get it. 30 minutes and 24 seconds for the Chargers. 29 minutes and 36 seconds for the Broncos. So very, very close. But it felt like that was the kind of game the Broncos were dominating because they were getting it done on the ground. They ran twice as many times. They gained 6 times as many yards nearly. But they also had some big plays. Cortland Sutton's 70-yard touchdown pass, the reception that he had 4 catches for 92 yards, but the big one, of course, the 70-yarder. That's the longest touchdown catch the Broncos had since 2016. so that they actually got the big plays. Philip Lindsay ripped off a 32-yard run. They got those. There's some things to be worried about. It's not, look, the Broncos are 1-4. They had a pair of fumbles as well. Joe Flacco fumbled twice, both on being hit. They're not convinced they're his fault, but because he got hit. And Justin Simmons was very lucky as well. He fumbled a ball that he had gotten, and he fumbled that one. He gets the interception, fumbles it, but finds a way. But fortunately, the Broncos get it back. So there are things to fix. I don't think you look at the Broncos and say they're solved. Flacco was sacked 3 times. He fumbled on 2 other times he was hit. He threw an interception again. Wasn't, I hate to use the pun, elite. Only threw for 182 yards and only 20 attempts. But I think that's how the Broncos will win these games. They're not built to get in shootouts. Let's put it that way. I think we've seen enough. 1-4, 0-5, what have you. Even if they had somehow beaten the Bears and the Packers and the Raiders, and we're talking about them being 4-1, or even 5-0 somehow, which they're not. They're 1-4. I don't think we'd still be looking at a team that you'd say, oh, yeah, they're ready to go toe-to-toe with other teams in shootouts. They're not. This is not a team that's going to go out and outscore people. If it ends up being a back and forth, the Broncos are in trouble. But this performance was what they were hoping for. Now, as exciting as it is, and it should be, keep in mind that the Chargers really didn't have a healthy tight end. They had Virgil Green. That dramatically changes their offense. The other squads that they'll be seeing might not have that same issue. So that's worth keeping in mind too. But look, enjoy it. They played well. It was sort of unfortunate the game was closer than that, and they got kind of tense down the road because of the punt return for King, who just slashed like a knife through hot butter through the Broncos punt coverage team. I mean, it was bad flashbacks. The Broncos have had so many of these questionable special teams plays, and they've had it with different players, and they've had it with different head coaches, and they've had it with different special teams coaches. So if you can tell what's going on there, enlighten me, because the only consistency is inconsistency. But otherwise, I think they played well, and they found a formula. The idea was to get, every host on this station that I heard harped on it, have to find a way to get Philip Lindsay the ball. Now, doesn't mean you have to feed him 30 times. You don't have to do the Christian McCaffrey thing. And they didn't. The Broncos got him 19 touches. And they got him 19 touches on 19 tries because the 4 passes, he completed all 4 to Lindsay. That was it, 19 touches. But in those 19 touches, he got 147 yards and a touchdown. That's the kind of weapon that Philip Lindsay is. And again, give Rich Gangarello credit. I think he has called some pretty good games in the last couple weeks. They have started to flow together a little bit better. The Broncos are doing this was the best of all of them, but the Broncos are doing a much better job of using Lindsay and Freeman together. Lindsay had 15 carries, Freeman had 13. Probably didn't feel watching it like it was that close. Felt like Lindsay was dominating it, but he wasn't. And by the way, Freeman wasn't bad. 13 for 61 is 4.7 a carry. Perfectly respectable. Lindsay was a ridiculous 7.6. But I think Scangarello deserves some credit. They took some deeper shots. They utilized the tight end, probably not as much as they should, but there were 5 shots, to the tight end. 3 different tight ends had catches. Go figure on that one. Your first round pick is Noah Fant. Jeff Heuerman, 1 for 26. Andrew Beck, 1 for 10. Noah Fant, 1 for 6. But they used it. Now, Emmanuel Sanders really was not involved. 1 catch for 9 yards. That's a little unfair because he had at least 1 catch called back because of a penalty. So a few things changed. But in the end, who cares? You don't complain about stats in a win. Be very, very unwise. Don't worry about it. You get the win, you don't worry about what your stats were. You won, especially when you were 0-4. I don't think the game was necessarily not called for Sanders. I think that they had a couple bad breaks, and the game just didn't go that way. Oh, well. That happens. But this was a good performance. I'd like to know what you think. RamosLaw.com text line is open 303-713-1043. You can call us or text us. What'd you think? Is this more what you had in mind? Do you feel the Broncos maybe got a little bit lucky? They got an underwhelming performance from the Chargers? Do you think they're rounding into form? I think it can be a little bit of both things. But I sure like looking at the Broncos' next game against Tennessee on Sunday, looking at the way they played and say, okay, now I think that's a game they can get. I've thought that before. Thought that against Jacksonville, I was wrong. Thought that against Oakland, I was wrong. But this time they're coming off a win, and this team now knows that they can win games. And it sounds silly at times. Of course, they're pro players. They've won at every level. I get all of that. But this team hadn't, and these guys need to be able to do it. They needed to get that win. Now they got it. It's a pressure valve that releases for this team. I don't think you'll hear as much chirping in the locker room. I don't think you'll hear as many weird little asides. You won't hear Manuel Sanders complaining too often, even though he had one catch. I don't think you'll hear about Von Miller complaining about not getting a sack. I don't think you'll hear about all these little jabs. Chris Harrison doesn't complain about a reporter that overheard something he said, because you got to win. You're above that stuff when you get a win. Even if you're not a great team, when you get a win, you don't whine about that stuff in a week. So for the Broncos and for Broncos fans, this is going to be a nice week. It's a deep breath. No, the team isn't good. No, they're almost certainly still not making the playoffs. Let's be realistic. But if you're a Bronco fan and you invest your 4 hours on a Sunday or more, and your money if you're going to the game, and everything else involved with it, it's totally fair that you would at least like to be entertained by the game. And you got that on Sunday. You can be entertained in a loss, too. I thought the Jacksonville game was pretty entertaining. But this was the kind of game that helps the Broncos a lot. If they are to turn this season around, that's one of the games that had to be there to do it. Now, what does turn it around mean? Does it mean I think they're going to have a winning record? No. But you also don't want to completely bottom out and win 3, 4, 5 games. And the truth of the matter is the Broncos were on that trajectory. Maybe they can get a little better. They look better than Tennessee to me, and now they know they can win. I know that Kansas City lost. I don't think they're going to beat Kansas City, even in Denver. I don't think so. Of course, I didn't think the Colts would beat them. Old Herman Edwards said, that's why you play the games. But you look at their next 4 games. Home against Tennessee, home against Kansas City, away at Indianapolis. And of course, don't take that for granted. They just knocked off the Chiefs. And home at Cleveland, who tonight, by the way, you were just listening to it, was awful. I mean, Bengals level awful. What's going on in Ohio? Yeah. That was a dog.
Well, they got Ohio State out there, so.
Yeah, maybe they have all the good athletes.
Maybe they just don't even watch NFL out there.
Did you see when Nick Bosa sacked Baker Mayfield and got him back for the old flag plant there?
Is that getting back though? If you're Joey Bosa
or Nick
Bosa,
yeah, Nick Bosa. Well, I mean, he was on the team that absorbed it.
Yeah,
sure.
But I don't know.
You get it later in the pros, not really.
I mean, it's a cool celebration.
But that's the kind of harmless smack talk that I enjoy.
Yeah.
It's that sort of really silly, petty kind of stuff that the guy hangs on to. And that amuses me.
Like when Cam Newton was doing this whole Superman thing.
Right.
And then the Broncos went in was it 2012? Pretty much almost shut them out. And I was like, and every sack they'd get, they do the Cam Newton thing and they'd zip it back up.
It's totally petty, but it's also totally hilarious. So I'm all for it. but the Cleveland was terrible. So look at this all of a sudden. And I'll be totally honest here. Let's even look past the bye. Minnesota's kind of a mess. Now, they're not bad. Minnesota's talented enough that you don't know what you'll get every week. They could look really good one week and bad the next week. But let's just look at the slate prior to the bye. Tennessee at home, Kansas City at home, Indianapolis on the road, Cleveland at home. 3 of your next 4 at home. Cleveland looks terrible. Tennessee's not very good. Indy is hit and miss. Is it entirely unthinkable to say the Broncos could go 3-1 over the next 4? I don't know that it is. They're not going 4-0. They might go 2-2. And look, and if they go 2-2, then they're a 3-6 team. I mean, that's where it gets interesting. One game, right? 4-5. You're talking about an entirely different conversation than if you're 3-6. It's just one game difference, but your entire season looks different. That's why for the Broncos, if they start playing better, they are going to look back at that Oakland game and at that Jacksonville game. They're going to regret those games very, very, very deeply. They do already, but it could get worse. But on the bright side, hey, Denver, you got to win. Celebrate. Enjoy it. I enjoyed it. What'd you think? RamosLaw.com text line is open, 303-713-1043. Call me. Text me. Let's talk about it. Next. The last time the Broncos had a touchdown reception that long, it was against the Chiefs back in 2016, and it was Benny Fowler. Benny Fowler. Benny Fowler the third, mind you. Getting that done. Courtland Sutton getting it done. As his breakout season continues, Sutton, now the Broncos' leading receiver in receptions and in yards, targets as well, yards per catch, touchdowns. What else? What else are you looking for? Yak. Yards after catch? Yeah, he leads in that too. How about first downs? Yeah, that too. Courtland Sutton is maybe not a number one receiver on every team in the league just yet, but he's definitely the number one guy on this team. 401 yards in 5 games, 3 touchdowns, including that 70-yarder yesterday. So the Broncos get the win, 20-13. They didn't dazzle, but the defensive performance was excellent. The questions that I have are still revolve around the offense. I'm not convinced the defense will stop everybody, but I think that kind of performance, when you hold the LA Chargers first. Okay, step 1, it's Monday. 2, I didn't say San Diego Chargers, which I still sometimes do, so getting better. But I did say Los Angeles Dodgers. Well, nowhere to go but up. Anyway, the Chargers, 246 yards of offense. That's it. That's a spectacular performance. And I know they're missing guys. I get it. I know. But the defense looked good. And I think for a week, it's pretty fair to back off because they had so many new guys, like we talked about. Really, 5 new starters by snap count. Mike Purcell in the middle, Shelby Harris on the outside. He was starting at nose tackle, but didn't belong there. Broncos came around to that, replaced Adam Gotsis with Harris, put Purcell in the middle. Alexander Johnson was spectacular on the inside. Literally, just spectacular. Not figuratively spectacular. It was literally a spectacle watching him. He was outstanding. You know how outstanding he is? The Broncos gave Vic Fangio the game ball. It's his first win as head coach. Fangio gave it to Johnson. He re-gifted the game ball from his first win. Johnson was that good, that impactful. Malik Reed out there looking very, very good. Reed looked ready, which is great, by the way, because Justin Hollins, the Broncos were planning on rotating those guys. Hollins got hurt. So, the Broncos, again, dealing with injuries, but this time really had some good performances. And then taking the lead at cornerback opposite Chris Harris, when it comes to snaps, was Duke Dawson, the late addition from the Pats. That allowed Kareem Jackson to go back to safety, where he was terrific. The rundown he got Eckler in at the corner, where he knocked Eckler out and he got him to fumble out of the end zone. Chargers got no points out of that because they coughed up the touchback. That was terrific. And he had that thing sniffed out the whole way. He looked great. Jackson looked great. The Broncos basically reinvented their defense on the fly. It's 5 out of 11 new guys. And it was the best performance they had all year. And the best young player they have on the defense wasn't even part of it. That's promising. If you're looking for hope for the Broncos, it's not that they're going to go to the Super Bowl. It's not that they're going to make the playoffs. It's that some of their younger players look like they could be part of the long-term solution. Purcell is not brand new. He's bounced around the league a little bit. Shelby Harris is a bit of a late bloomer. He's bounced around the league a little bit. Neither guy's 30, though. But Johnson, Reed, Dawson, yeah, those are young guys. Devontae Bosby had looked pretty good. Unfortunately, he got hurt. He's going to miss some time. But that's kind of the goal for the Broncos this year, isn't it? To try to find who can be part of the solution going forward. And if you think they are, you need to play them. This isn't the preseason, but in many ways it really is. It's the preseason for 2020. And for a lot of the young Broncos, that's the way they have to treat it. So that was exciting. Phillip Lindsay was tremendous. I understand that this Chargers team is not the strongest D there is. No, they're not the weakest either, but they're not the strongest D there is. They're missing significant guys. They're missing Melvin Ingram. They're missing Derwin James. Those are Pro Bowlers. You lose 2 Pro Bowlers, it's definitely easier to play against a team like that. And the Broncos still only got 20 points. So you can't go nuts about it. Kevin Kistner in the booth like he usually is. Kevin was working on some numbers. I was working on some numbers too. We do that during the break. If you're ever watching on the YouTube stream, by the way, you can pick that up at 1043thefan.com. If you want to look, see what I look like. I mean, you can also go to Twitter at Astrotar and look at that. It's the same picture. It's not, you're not going to be like, "Ooh, he's Brad Pitt." So I don't mean to disappoint you in advance, but yeah, Mike's not going to say that about me. But that's okay. I've come to, I've worn this skin suit long enough. I'm pretty used to, I'm used to what it looks like. Whatever. But you may have seen Kevin sneak in here during the break, and we're working on some numbers together. And that's what the Broncos offense. So I'm not going to be the Debbie Downer here. I think there's a lot to be excited about. But you also want to be realistic. This team is 1-4. And they're not going to the playoffs, barring something really weird. And not just something really weird, a sequence of some things really weird. The Broncos have scored 90 points in 5 games, okay? That's 18 a game. Oddly, the NFL at this point has 18 teams that are winning. They have 18 winning teams, and the rest are losing, right? We got 18 winners, 14 losers. That's where it stands right now. Out of the 18 winning teams, the Broncos 90 points scored. And the Broncos, of course, as we know, are not in the winning teams. But to get an idea of how offensively forward this league is, they are tied in points with the Buffalo Bills with 90. The Bills are 4-1. They are ahead of the Chicago Bears, who have 87 points. Although, so what? They played the Bears and lost to the Bears, so who cares about that one? But that means out of the 18 teams in this league with winning records, of which the Broncos are not, they've scored more points than only one of those teams. Their offense isn't nearly good enough. And when you go all the way down, by the way, those are also the only 2 teams of all the winners that are even in double digits. The next closest team is the Raiders at 103. They're the only team, by the way, the Raiders, at that level. The next lowest is the Vikings at 112. So in 5 games, the Broncos are 32 points behind all of the winning teams in the league, save 3. Their offense is not nearly good enough. That's basically a touchdown a game. Not quite, but basically a touchdown a game. They're a touchdown a game behind pace of almost every winning team in this league. Defense matters. Defense will win you games from time to time. But the old chestnut that the defenses are what matter anymore, it's out the window. The league's rules have changed. The way everything's played changes. You will win more games if you have a consistent offense than if you have a consistent defense. You don't believe me? That's fine. Don't believe me. Just go look at the standings. That's what tells you. Leader of that defense is Von Miller. Von Miller didn't get a sack. He didn't get an interception. He didn't rack up huge tackle numbers. But I firmly believe that the interception that Rivers threw, the first one, was forced by Von Miller's pressure. As I've said before, pressure creates turnovers. Yards create sacks. I don't think there was much to be displeased with Von Miller's performance. Somebody significant in the Broncos seemed to find a problem with it anyway. I'll tell you who that is next. Uneventful. That's how Vic Fangio described Von Miller's game yesterday in the Broncos' 2013 win over the Chargers. Uneventful. Now, the stats say that Von Miller came away with 2 tackles. Okay? That's not impressive. I'm not going to pretend it is. He's also double-teamed on every play now, mind you, because Bradley Chubb is out for the year. Nevertheless, unimpressive. But uneventful? The first interception that Phillip Rivers threw to Justin Simmons, that was caused directly by pressure from Von Miller. He saw Miller coming at him. He backed away. He pulled his body, kind of jumped through, came up, floated it, and bang, Simmons comes down with it. Simmons also immediately almost gives it away, but that's another story. But that was Miller. That interception was because Von Miller forced Phillip Rivers, a guy who's pretty veteran at this stuff, into making that bad throw. So I get that the stats aren't there. I get that at the moment, Von Miller is on pace for 7 sacks. In every season in his career where he's played more than 9 games, he played 9 games in 2013 and had 7 sacks. The lowest he's had is 10. I get that. Right now he's on pace for 7. Now, here's the funny thing. Let's say Von Miller goes out and gets a pair of sacks against Tennessee next week. Then he's back on pace for 12. Are we freaking out about this? Because people act as if Von Miller's a 20-sack-a-year guy somehow. He's not. He's brilliant. He's a Hall of Fame level sackmeister here. But look, 2018, 14.5. 2017, 10. 2016, 13.5. 2015, 11. 2014, 14. Those are all outstanding numbers. I'm not running any of those numbers down. My point is if Miller has one game where he gets a pair of sacks, he's right on pace to be 11 again, right where he usually is. Not that far off. He's actually not that far behind pace in sacks. He really isn't. But the Broncos defense hasn't been able to put together an entirely solid performance, and so coordinators have been scheming around Von Miller and basically saying, that's the one guy that can wreck our plan. We're not going to let him do it. Look at Von Miller's tackles here. Von's on pace for 58 tackles. Okay? Again, this is where people look at the stats and go, oh, that's not very good. You know how many he had last year? 48. You know how many he had the year before that? 57. In the previous 6 seasons for Von Miller, he has had more than 58 tackles twice. And one of those years, 2014, he had 59. So Miller's actually on a tackle pace that is better than the majority of his career. So I think that this kind of, I get that part of what Fangio wants to do, he's an old school guy, is continue pushing Miller so he's not complacent. I get that. And I get there's value to it. To an extent. Do you want to have a Jalen Ramsey situation on your hands, Denver? Because when Von Miller really isn't being just uneventful, he's on pace for usually a higher than normal tackle rate already. And even he would agree that his season's been underwhelming. He's on pace for, as it stands, the 5th highest tackle total in his career. And the number 2 and 3 seasons, by the way, came in his first 2 career years. And yes, he's down in sacks at the moment. But like I said, one good game puts him right back on track to where he usually is. Do you think that Vic Fangio is going to get a vastly more improved Von Miller by just kind of, if not picking at him, but saying, yeah, whatever, he's a guy? Because that's basically what you're hearing out of Vic Fangio. Yeah, Miller was out there. He was okay. It's a lot harder for Von Miller to be better than okay because he's double-teamed all the time. And also, Von Miller's okay is way better than most other people's okay. He's on pace for a good tackle year. Better than normal. It's not as if he's out there doing nothing. I don't think I'd put much of the blame on this season starts on Von Miller. You guess you could make an argument, I suppose, because of the late breakdowns against Chicago and Jacksonville. You can put it on anybody on the defense you want. If you were on the field, you can wear that. Shouldn't have coughed those up. But I don't think Miller's any more responsible for it than Chris Harris or Kareem Jackson or Justin Simmons, less so than Simmons, or even Bradley Chubb when he was healthy. And Fangio isn't making a point of saying, yeah, they were okay. He's just picking on Miller. Why? The idea that, okay, this will make him better somehow because all of a sudden, in Von Miller's 9th year in the league, a first-year head coach that's telling him you're not good enough is certainly what's going to drive Von Miller, right? I mean, certainly. That's the push that Von Miller needed. He already wasn't a borderline Hall of Famer if he quit tomorrow. What he really needed was a first-year head coach in his 9th year in the league to basically call him pedestrian. That's what's going to launch him to the next level of his career. What you end up with more than likely is you end up with Jadeveon Clowney situations or Jalen Ramsey situations. Von Miller has 2 more years left on his contract. I think he likes to be a Bronco. I think he'd like to be associated with the Broncos for his entire career. I think he'd like to play here his whole career. But he'd also like to win another Super Bowl. And if the Broncos don't turn it around and turn into a winning team, a competitive team, and they don't do it by the time his contract's up, he's not coming back. And I highly doubt that having a brand new head coach he just started working with saying, basically, he was okay. Von Miller's okay. He's one of the guys I have. I don't really think that's helping the case. I'm not saying he should be above reproach by any stretch of the imagination. If you're a pro football player, I don't care if you're Von Miller, I don't care if you're Joe Schmo, I don't care if you're Peyton Manning. If you don't play well, if you're not doing your job and your coach calls you out, well, play better. But if you are doing at least average, if you're not significantly worse to what you have been, given the circumstances, I'm not really sure that piling on a guy really helps. Whatever your job is. Do you do better when your job when your boss comes up and says, "Hey, that was a great job you did today. I noticed that. I noticed you did above average. You went above and beyond. Great job. I appreciate it. I noticed." Or do you like it when your boss just gets on you because you filed your report 10 minutes late or you didn't respond to that email in the first 30 seconds because he wanted it that way? Which one makes you work harder? Do you work harder because you think someone appreciates what you do, or do you work harder because you're afraid of your boss? Or you're afraid of your boss embarrassing you in public? I don't know about you, and I do know that some people respond better to the fear stuff, but I don't. And I don't really get the impression that Von Miller does either, because you watched him bristle early in his career when he had the problems with the marijuana suspension. And then when DeMarcus Ware came here and consistently pumped him up and kept saying, "Hey, I know what you can do. You can do this. Great job, Von. Look at what you did. Now take it to the next level." Then Von Miller ignited. So everything that we've ever seen says that Von Miller's the kind of guy that responds a lot better to the carrot than the stick. I know Vic Fangio's got the old school thing, which is, everyone's got to be tough. Okay, fine, whatever. I get it. It's football. That's fine.
Sean, do you think this is a little biased of, I coached Khalil Mack last year. Look at the season Khalil Mack had. I need Von Miller to be like Khalil Mack. Do you think there's something of that going on with Fangio?
Well, it could be, and if it is, that's a mistake by Fangio.
Because he was...
I'm sorry, who lines up next to Khalil Mack? Was it Roquan Smith or Danny Trevathan? Who lines up next to Von Miller? Todd Davis and Josie Jewell? If you're lucky? If that's the case, then Fangio's expectations are unrealistic. Look at the front line of the Bears. Look at the front line of the Broncos. Mike Purcell, as well as he played, I'm not tearing him down. This is just the fact. He's a journeyman. And now he's a starter, and he should be the starter because he's your best option there. He could barely crack the rotation in Chicago. If Fangio's frustration with Miller is because he's not doing what Khalil Mack did, that's on Fangio not being realistic about understanding the personnel he has.
And it kind of makes me wonder if Vaughn's getting mad at it. One, you're calling me out in public twice, saying I'm not playing good when I'm getting double teamed every play.
He caused that interception.
Yeah.
He caused the interception to Simmons.
And he's playing great stopping the run. And then coming into training camp, it was Vic Fangio's defense. Bradley Chubb's the perfect fit. It's Bradley Chubb who could be Khalil Mack.
How many times did you see Von Miller out, by the way, in coverage in this game? I know I saw it 3 times.
Can't do it.
Okay. All right. What, you're going to complain about his pass rush? Well, you're not rushing him. You're making him cover tight ends. So how about you don't complain about his pass rush if you're not rushing him? Should I be picking on Derek Wolfe for his lack of interceptions? It's not what he's out there for.
And where does Vaughn need to improve? That's my thing.
Where at least at this stage in his career, where even can he improve? Not really with very much.
I'm sorry.
Really, he's not going to get faster at 30.
What's he need to improve? In his coverage skills? You don't need him in coverage.
I don't know what the plan is there, but it seems like there's a lot of downside and not a lot of upside in poking Von Miller. I don't get it. I don't get the impression he's not trying. I don't get the impression he doesn't care. But I do get the impression you could have a Jalen Ramsey situation. How'd you enjoy that, Denver? This is coming after a win. Okay. You want to pick on somebody. You want to pick on a unit of your team. Ooh, there's one you can pick on. I'll tell you which one next. Well, that's not great. Talking about Deontay Spencer, the Broncos punt returner, who has been quite, look, the bar is low, right? If you have, I think my wood is made of this table's made of some sort of polymer, not wood. If you have something wood near you, you should knock on it because I'm about to jinx him. The Broncos punt returning challenges have been years long. And step one is just finding a guy who won't fumble it. So Spencer's at least done that. And he really hasn't been a disaster back there. This is a guy that was a phenomenal returner in the Canadian League. Not that, of course, necessarily means all that much. I get it. But he's been at least reliable on the catching part of the equation. But I don't understand, and I hate doing it. I hate being sounding like the get off my lawn guy, right? I still have yet to figure out why anybody fields a ball honestly within, at worst, the 7, really more the 10. I understand that maybe once in a while a guy's going to down it. I do. But footballs bounce in the strangest ways. They mainly take a big hop backwards. You're going to get a touchback more often than most. I'm not understanding why guys aren't coaching players to say, in those kind of situations where the distances, line up at the 10-yard line. If it goes over your head, run away from it. Don't touch it. Don't grab it anywhere. This is hardly the only team that's had that issue with Spencer catching that ball at the 5 yesterday. You see it every time. You watch every NFL game, and I think once a game, in every NFL game, somebody does that. Catches it at some weird, at the 6, at the 5, at the 3, for reasons that I cannot fathom. But that's just got to be a no-no. You've got to tell a guy, hey, you do that again, we'll find someone else. And I know the Broncos don't want to do that because they have gone through so many punt returners, and even finding one that can just catch it is hard enough. But you just can't do that. And especially if Fangio's saying, hey, yeah, he's not coached to do that. Well, at least that's good. Would have been extra concerned if he was saying, oh, yeah, he's coached to catch it at the 5. But you just have to tell these guys, you have to know where you are and where you start. And if the first step you take is backwards, don't chase the ball anymore. Let it bounce. The odds on it going out of bounds or getting downed within the 2 or 3 are lower than you getting tackled within the 10. At best, let it go. And I don't understand why, not just the Broncos, every NFL team seems to have a challenge with this. I get when you're a punt returner, oftentimes you're not a star player. You don't have the Antonio Browns of the world returning punts. You saw it with Odell Beckham Jr. tonight with Cleveland, and he immediately fumbled it. So you don't have the stars go back there and do it. So these guys get back there, and they are probably justifiably thinking, this is how I'm going to make my name. I'm going to take this thing. I'm going to break it big, and then I'm going to make my name, and then I'm going to get more chances to play receiver or corner, whichever I play. I get it. I do get it. I understand the instinct. But it's got to be fixed. The Broncos could have easily gotten a safety, or at least surrendered a safety, or at least had a bad punt that put the Chargers in great position. They score. You just gave away those points. You catch that ball at the 5, the only good thing that's going to happen is maybe you get to the 10. The only good thing. What if you fumble? What if you muff it? What if whatever happens? I'd much rather gamble that the punter bounce it in the end zone. Because, by the way, you may have noticed, punters don't try to angle it out anymore. Because I think they've realized the punt returners just catch it anyway. Why bother trying to angle it out and miss it? You don't see the guys try the coffin corner punts anymore. Not very often. What they're trying to do is bounce it and get some backspin and hopefully get it down. And I get that. And I get that's why returners want to do it. But it's not a frequent thing. This is where the perception is different than the reality. It's like in baseball. You have a 300 hitter. That 300 hitter is one of the best in the game. So you go, oh my gosh, well, I better not pitch to him. Well, sure, pitch to him. He still gets out 70% of the time. The odds say you should go right at him, even if he's elite. It's the same idea with the punt. It's likely going to go into the end zone. That's what you want to let happen. That part of special teams is infuriating. It's not as infuriating as kick coverage, of which the Broncos still have a very significant issue. It's a good question. Seems like every year, not every week, every year we have this same discussion. It's different coaches and different players. How is this still happening? The Broncos should enjoy the win they got. They deserved it. At the same time, if you'd like to get more of those wins, you don't score enough points as an offense, if you're the Denver Broncos, to allow those kind of mistakes. They will automatically make your game way too close, way too dangerous, and every once in a while, when the Scarecrow plays with fire, he gets burned. This Broncos game shouldn't have been that close. But it was, because they let Desmond King take it 68 yards down the field on him. That's the kind of stuff that has to be shored up. The guy even gets a 15-yard, 20-yard punt return. You're not happy about it. But at the end of the game, not everyone's talking about, hey, did you see that reasonably long punt return that they returned? Oh, did it go for a touchdown or anything? No, I don't remember either. Yeah, it's fine. You just can't have guys break it. And the Broncos can be better than this. This is just about holding your lanes and not over pursuing and working as a unit. And for whatever reason, they just can't seem to do it. You don't have Brock Olivo to kick around here anymore, okay? It's still a problem. And it's got to get fixed. It's just that simple. You have to find a way to execute when you can execute. This team does not have enough talent on it, top to bottom, to give yourself the kind of break that relaxing on special teams will do for you. You're not the Chiefs, who can have a quarterback that can throw 375 yards whenever he feels like it. And that doesn't mean they're going to win every game either, by the way. But you can't do that. So you can't afford those kind of screw-ups. This is the kind of team in which an interception at the wrong time, a fumble at the wrong time, a blown kick or punt coverage, those are the things for this team that are so close. You either lose that game or you find yourself going right down to the wire because you don't generally score enough points to get over it. This team scores 18 points a game. You give up 7 on a punt return, all of a sudden you're in a game no matter what happened. That's if the other team had no offense, you're in a game. All the other teams have offense. The Broncos, realistically, that's why I give them tons of credit for this game. Realistically, let's be completely honest about this. I will be shocked, absolutely shocked, if the Broncos allow another team fewer than 246 total yards of offense this year. I'd be pleasantly surprised if they let another team be under 300. 246 total yards on a road game against a Phillip Rivers-led team with Keenan Allen being the AFC's leading receiver. That was amazing. The defense deserves a ton of credit. And yes, including Von Miller, who wasn't just okay, regardless of what Vic Fangio said. You talk about stats not telling the whole story. You would hope that the head coach was one of those people that understood that. The interception that your team got early on was because Von Miller forced it. No, you don't get a stat for that. But he did. But this Broncos team is not going to hold any other team to 246 total yards. They're just not. And it was still a one-score game. They can't afford those kind of mistakes. They're just not talented enough to. Want to know what you think? RamosLaw.com text line 303-713-1043. Lots of text coming in. You can also call. Get on the program as well. That way, we'll hear from Vic Fangio. We'll have an opportunity to hear from him a little later in the program. But want to talk to you about something. If you didn't get a chance to hear it yesterday, I was on the pregame, as I am on Sundays, do 10 to noon, with Coach John Davis. Jason LaConfora, a very good writer at CBS, talked about some of the Broncos that could be on the trading block if this season goes a little more south. Now, what does that mean? Just this game? Further? We'll hear what he said next. The Broncos are now 1-4, which you would think might ease some of the idea that maybe someone should get traded, that they should burn it all down, they should have the fire sale. You can't really do that in the NFL like you can in, say, baseball anyway, but I get the point. And I get how people have been thinking that maybe that's what the Broncos should do. That they should move on from some of their guys, presumably the ones who are free agents. Now, the Broncos won that game. Maybe some of that talk goes away. But as of yesterday, CBS Sports' Jason La Canfora talked about reports that he had about the Broncos and about potential trades. Pay very close attention to when he said John Elway started getting calls. Well, okay. Now that's interesting. Going into week 3, so that's after the Chicago loss, just 0-2. 0-2 at a time where you maybe should have been 1-1, maybe even 2-0. So what's interesting about this to me is a few fronts. And the easy one, the low-hanging fruit is, oh my gosh, they could trade Chris Harris or Emmanuel Sanders or Derek Wolfe, who are all free agents after the year. Or maybe even Von Miller if they wanted to reinvent the team. Yeah, that's easy to talk about, and we'll talk about it. But what I thought was interesting was the going into week 3, John Elway started getting calls. What that tells me, and I look around this studio, and we have 3 little, I guess you could call them shrines. They're very hastily put together. It's what you'd kind of expect in sports radio. It's a bunch of our faces held up on like printer paper with literal duct tape onto a wall behind they're below the Lysol containers, and some remote controls, what looks like a can of chewing tobacco, and then that's the shelf of mediocrity. That's what we call it. It's the shelf of mediocrity. And it has most of the hosts on this station, including me, having the Broncos being between 7-9 and 9-7. I had them at 7-9. I wanted to say 6-10, but I didn't want to be the downer. I wanted to be positive. I'm a Colorado native. I grew up a Bronco fan. Not going to lie. I was trying to be positive. Gave him a bonus win. I regret it. But anyway, then we have over there the wall of optimism, which includes Tony Romo, our friend Nick Ferguson, who had them winning a bunch of games that they're not going to win, to be honest. That's okay. I mean, we just pick these. We don't know. It's like the weather. You make an educated guess. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And then we have the other one that has our own Brandon Stokley that said 6-10. He was the least bullish of all our hosts. And NFL Network's Adam Rank, who had the Broncos at 2-14. It's possible 5 games in that Adam might get the closest to any of us. We'll see. But the idea that other teams started calling it week 3, what that tells me, and that to me was so interesting. That's why I told you to pay attention to that. It's because what it says is that other general managers around this league saw what a lot of us saw, that the Broncos thought they were going to go back to the playoffs. The Broncos front office thought, we got Joe Flacco. We're going to go sign some big dollar veterans like Kareem Jackson and Juwan James, and then we're going to be right back in the mix. The Broncos believed that. Shows me that most of the other teams around the league, by the way, all 32 teams keep laser-focused attention on every other team's roster. The other teams in the league did not think the Broncos roster was that good. That's That's just it. They didn't. They didn't wait for the Broncos to start 0-4 to start calling John Elway about it. They wanted to plant that seed early. I'm not really for trading guys, and I'll tell you why. The compensatory picks you'd get when they leave free agency, assuming you don't sign too many, it's a bit of a complicated formula. There's no need to get too terribly into the weeds, but it's roughly how many you sign compared to how many you lose and how much money the guys you lose sign for. Chris Harris will probably sign for a decent amount of money. He might not get the $10 million plus he wants, but it'll be decent. Emmanuel Sanders, as a receiver, as long as he continues a pretty good year, he'll be in that ballpark too. I don't know how much Derek Wolfe will get. But you trade those guys, and Emmanuel Sanders might net you, what, a fifth? Demaryius Thomas netted you a fourth. Emmanuel Sanders coming off the Achilles injury, being older, and being a free agent. Okay, let's say a fifth. Okay. I'd rather have, and maybe Harris gets you a third. I don't know if Wolf gets you anything. I'd rather have the full season of those guys playing their very best ball because they have to. If they want a new contract for the big money that they're after, they have to. Emmanuel Sanders has to put up the best numbers he can possibly put up. Chris Harris has to look as good on tape as he can possibly look. Derek Wolfe has to do the same thing. Keep in mind, Justin Simmons, Will Parks are both free agents too. All those guys that are going to be free agents, they have to play their best all year long. If I'm the Broncos, I'd rather have that. I'd rather know that I got these guys that are going to fight all 16 games for me because they're personally motivated to do so than trade them for some mid-round pick that I hope pans out somewhere. And keep in mind, the better they do, not only the better you do, but the more they'll get paid, which means the better you do in the compensatories. The only knock is that you have to kick it back a year. I get that. You get those compensatories in 2021. That said, I'd rather have a better 2019 performance and better 2021 compensatory picks than lower but more fresh 2020 picks. I think that's a longer-term view that would pay off better. I also think it sends a better message to the team. Vic Fangio's a first-year head coach. It's hard for him to be able to go, oh, you're a free agent, we're not real good, we'll ship you out.
So, Sean, is this team building for 2021 then?
Well, I think in the NFL, if you turn things around, especially if you have the right quarterback, you can make a jump. I think they should be looking to 2020. But I think you'll be able to anyway. What I guess I look at, Kevin, is I think that let's say you get a third out of Chris Harris and a fifth out of Emmanuel Sanders. And by the way, I'm being optimistic. A third and a fifth, and let's say you get a seventh out of Wolf. Okay? Does an extra third, fifth, and a seventh in 2020 make you demonstrably better than the message you send to the locker room by we'll trade guys who are at the end of their contract if our team's not very good? And does it make them demonstrably better than they could be right now and not giving up on the season, which is an important message to show young guys. To me, it's better to hold on to them and take the two possibilities you know will be good.
And that's the way you got to look at it, because when we look at the situation, yeah, we want the best value from these guys.
Right.
We know they're not going to be sticking around.
Right. Either way, that's why you consider trading them.
But if you trade Sanders now, and he's a fifth, and you're getting in return, but let's just say he goes out and signs a huge contract
because he was balling out all year because he wanted the big money deal.
Gets 1,100 yards, goes out, gets $10 million a year.
Now you get like a fourth or even a third.
In 2021.
Yeah. But
this team's not going anywhere next season either.
Yeah, look, they're not winning they're not going for the 2020 Super Bowl either. No. Not just yet. So they're rebuilding.
Maybe it is time to start thinking 2021. 2021, John Elway's last season, Vic Fangio's last season, Joe Ellis's last season, Von Miller's last season. I'm just saying, 2021. And Trevor Lawrence comes out. I
don't think you should be making that. I don't think you should be making the trades. I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth it for what they'd get in return. I really don't. That's the trick. Now, the question is if you're going to trade guys that you can't use, that aren't necessarily free agents, you're moving them along for different reasons, well, that's something different, maybe so. But the other thing is, if they were, let's talk about who would be left. See how you feel about that team. Is that really worth it? We'd look at what a post-draft landscape would look like next. just for argument's sake, let's go down this idea that the Broncos kind of fall apart. They come back to Tennessee. They lay an egg. Turns out that it's kind of a fluke win against the Chargers. Then they get smacked around by the Chiefs. Then they lose to the Colts, who beat the Chiefs. And now you're walking into the situation where the trade deadline looms and your team is out of it. Broncos still have one win, let's say, right? So they decide, let's make some moves. And let's make some trades. Let's start with Derek Wolfe. So, if the Broncos move away from Derek Wolfe, regardless of what they get, remember, they've shuffled some things around now. Shelby Harris is now a starter. He starts over Adam Gotsis now. Vic Fangio had basically said he played well enough to continue in that role. So your starters at defensive end are going to be Gotsis and Harris. Okay, maybe that's not the world's worst downgrade, but it's a downgrade. Not to say you move away from Emmanuel Sanders. How's everyone feeling about Deshaun Hamilton? Good? Because he gets bumped up to being a starting wide receiver. He starts opposite of Courtland Sutton. That's not to mention Chris Harris. Now, behind Harris, who took every one of the Broncos' 70 defensive snaps yesterday, the cornerback with the most snaps behind him was Duke Dawson, 81%. Following him was Devontae Harris, 44%. Then Isaac Yiadom, 39%. Now, this assumes that Bosby is going to be out for a while. But realistically, even when Bosby's back, you're talking about your starting cornerbacks are Devontae, Bosby, and Duke Dawson. Or Isaac Yiadom. Or maybe even Devontae Harris, who took more snaps than Yiadom. So, comfortable with any of that? Truth of the matter is that would probably be, no matter how you think of their relative potential talent, that would probably be the worst pair of starting cornerbacks in the NFL. I mean, the worst. Dead last. I mean, Isaac Yiadom and Duke Dawson, starters? Yeesh. So, I mean, you'd be basically giving up on the season if you traded these guys. Not only are you moving away from good players, but what you'd have left would mean that you're punting on the year entirely. And if you're trying to get the Malik Reeds of the world, the Alexander Johnsons of the world, the Courtland Suttons of the world, the Noah Fants, the Dalton Reisners, you're trying to get these guys understanding what life is in the NFL. Do you want to punt away one of their earlier seasons? Just punt away the whole year? But then tell them, hey, go out there and risk injury. Go out there and play hard. Go out there and show us everything you can do. That's how you end up with the Miami Dolphins. You get guys out there that are, I don't even know what you're teaching to your players. I get it. They're tanking for Tua. I get it. But as bad as the Cincinnati Bengals are, and they're awful, they're not throwing away their season. They're just bad. And there's a difference between being bad and just giving up on your year. I don't think the Broncos are in a position to give up on their year. I don't think they have the luxury to do that. The idea that the Broncos have this great winning culture that's surrounded them forever. Look, it's been a while. Besides the Super Bowl with Manning, which now looks like a blip, by the way, over the last decade or so. The younger guys aren't necessarily coming in going, it's the Broncos' great winning culture. It's they had Peyton Manning for a few years and they were really good. You build the culture by basically showing your team you come out and you play hard all the time. You try to win games every time. And you know that the front office and the coaching staff has your back. We're not throwing you out there to be roadkill, like when you see in college football that CSU schedules a game in Alabama. You know you're out there to get steamrolled so the university can make some money. That's the way college football works. So I'm not blaming. I'm not throwing CSU there and saying that they did anything wrong. That's how it works. But it's not the way the pros work. Shouldn't do it that way.
Sean, let me ask you this then. Should they go out and try and re-sign Chris Harris right now to tell these young guys, hey, look, we're not tanking. We're going after Chris, the best corner in football, and we're going to pay him like he deserves to be paid.
You could. Wouldn't hurt. I don't think he wants to be here, but you could.
What if you offer him the most money out of any cornerback in football?
Well, I think the problem is the Broncos are already so salary cap strapped because they've made such bad decisions with their free agents. They don't have that luxury. Remember, they have some of the lowest salary cap space in the league. That's why they had to make that atrocious deal of restructuring Joe Flacco's contract. I don't think they can afford to overpay literally anybody. But it wouldn't hurt to bring it up and say, hey, is there a middle ground? Chris, can we let bygones be bygones? Is there a middle ground that you could have? We'd sure like you around to help us teach these younger guys. We'd sure like to have you in the Ring of Fame one day.
I mean, if you come up and say, hey, we'll give you $15 million.
But you can't afford that. And you shouldn't.
But they restructured Flacco's contract.
Yeah, but you don't chase, you can't throw good money after bad. The truth of the matter is that the kind of money that Chris Harris is looking for, it hasn't been handed out in the last 4 years to free agent cornerbacks over the age of 30. His expectations right now, at least, according to what everyone else around the league gets paid, are unrealistic. Maybe there's a middle ground to be found, and I think it's worth seeing if you can find it. But I don't think you have to go over the moon to do it. I don't know. Jordan's been on hold on the RamosLaw.com text line. Want to go to Jordan. How are you this evening?
Good, Sean. How you doing?
Much better after a win. I tell you, it was getting a little boring beating that dead horse all the last month.
Yeah, relieves a little pressure, huh? Takes a little, lets the air out of the tires a little bit. So, I heard that interview with Jason La Canfora, and he said GM's been calling Elway after week 3 because they didn't think the Broncos were going to be as good as Elway thought. My question is why do these GMs know that the Broncos aren't going to be as good as Elway thought when Elway doesn't know that what other GMs are thinking? That's my question. How can they see that there's not any talent? And Elway thinks that by getting Flacco and some other key free agent signings, that they're going to be right back in the mix. See what I'm saying? They know their job. Elway apparently sees it through rose-colored glasses.
Well, Jordan, that's an interesting point, and I guess I will answer this with one of my favorite jokes. What do you call the person who graduates last in their class in medical school? Doctor. Right? They're all not necessarily created the same. So you can go pick out any old doctor out of the phone book, right? And you don't know necessarily. One of them might have been the person at the top of their class. Okay, the doctor you went to, she might have been magna cum laude here and knows everything. And the guy you picked might have been the one that barely skated by with the C minuses. But guess what? They all get their doctorates. Everybody who's a GM in the league gets to be a GM in the league, but they're not all created equal. It's no different than coaches. It's no different than anything like that in the front office. Not all not all owners either. All those owners can be all billionaires. Good for them. Doesn't mean they all know what they're doing equally. Doesn't mean they all work so hard equally. Doesn't mean they care about football equally. In Elway's case, whatever you feel about the judgment of his performance as GM, and I think truthfully at this point, now I've gone over it, I think he's a guy that he's got to see. He's not the head of the class. He's not the magna cum laude guy. He's not the summa cum laude guy. He's got to see. He's had a few years where he's had a lot of A's, a few years where he's had a lot of F's. And quite frankly, they've been about 50-50, so I think he gets to see. To me, he isn't average general manager that is trending to below average. I don't think he's a disaster. You can't just throw out all the years that they had success, even though I do think it's fair to attribute them more to Manning than Elway. But you can't throw them out and just say Elway gets no part of them. Of course he does. But that's the way I guess I'd put it. It's the old joke, you know? All you have to do is get the C's get degrees, as they used to joke about, right? So, yeah, you get to be called doctor. Doesn't mean you're that good of one. Just means you are one. And I think that's the challenge because, Jordan, you're exactly right. The rest of the GMs around the league, or at least a good chunk of them, according to La Canfora, look at the Broncos and say, well, I see that roster. They're not going to be very good. And we can go off of Elway's public quotes of basically saying, yeah, I think we're ready to go back and hunt for the playoffs, essentially, and go, oh yeah, they're mistaken. They're not that good. I'm going to see if I can maybe be there when some of the leaves fall off the tree.
And you got to realize too, a team that calls John Elway by week 3, it could have been a team calling everyone saying, "Hey, you got any guys on the block?"
Oh, it should be.
It could have been a simple conversation.
That's the thing.
Like
That's
that.
the GM's job. Look, if I was a GM in the NFL or any other sport, those other GMs, they would know me very well. Some of them would love me. Some of them would hate me. Some of them would be in the middle. But they don't know who I am because I'm checking in with all of them every week. Every time one of them comes to town, let's go play a round of golf. Just hang out. Just, shoot the breeze. See what happens. Yeah, that's what you should do. That's your job.
I mean, Bill Belichick could have been the team that called the Broncos.
Sure. You don't know.
Hey, anything on Vaughn.
Yeah.
A simple conversation like that. So I don't know if everyone's over smarting John Elway on this. They could have been a simple phone call too.
But I think there probably is, where there's smoke, there's usually some fire. And I think there's a little bit of fire when you basically see other GMs that early say, yeah, when your team doesn't perform the way you think they will, you got my cell. Hit me up. We'll talk more about this next. Well, it's always Reaction Monday, but it's not always Reaction to Wins Monday, which doesn't roll off the tongue as well and doesn't really work well for that big-voiced guy in the commercial, so I get why we don't use it. But I can tell you one thing, it's a lot nicer. I had a little more pep in the old step coming into work today, knowing I could talk about a win as opposed to a loss. Because that was getting old. And I know I'm not the only one who felt that way about it. So the question now, after the Broncos have won and have looked pretty good. They looked pretty good in that game. And the truth of the matter is, they've actually, I'm not going to orange slices this because they lost. But they should have beaten Oakland. They're a better team than Oakland. They gave up a last-second drive at home to Chicago. They gave up a last-second drive at home to Jacksonville. They could very easily be 3-2. With just a couple more minutes of playing better, they could be 3-2. Now, again, even if they were 3-2, I wouldn't be sitting here telling you, oh, the Broncos have a chance to make the Super Bowl. They don't. They're not good enough. Sorry. They're just not. So the question is, can they turn around the season? The more important question is, what would that look like? Because if you think turning around the season only means, oh, okay, they have to go 10-6 and get into the playoffs. No, they can't turn the season around. But what does turn around the season mean? Let's think about this for a minute, right? The Broncos started 0-4. If the Broncos finish 6-10 and hit Brandon Stokley's prediction on the button, okay, 6-10. But to do that, the Broncos would have to finish the year 6-6 after starting 0-4, right? 6-6. So if they finish 6-6 on the year in their final 12, isn't that turning around the season, even if the final result isn't that impressive? I guess I would argue that it is. Now, the problem is that's what they won last year. It's hard to say you made a lot of progress. You switched out your coach. You switched out your quarterback. Switched out a bunch of players and ended up with the exact same record again. But this is where you have to parse it. And I don't know the answer. I'm curious to what all of you think as well. So RamosLaw.com text lines, 303-713-1043. You can text or call. What would turn the season around mean to you knowing they started 0-4? Does it matter? Do you basically say the first 4 games are part of it, so they don't turn the season around unless they go at least 8-8, which means they have to go 8-4 the rest of the way. In this case, now 7-4 the rest of the way. Good luck with that, by the way. But is that what it is to you? Because that's fair. That's fair. This is a beauty is in the eye of the beholder type of thing. What do you think it is? To me, I guess I would say at this point, if I saw the defense continue to perform, not holding a team to 246 total yards, that's not going to happen again. Let's not be silly here. But seeing a defense play that well, given the injuries, and seeing the offense get a little bit better and understand their identity, which is an identity based around running the ball and occasionally throwing some darts deep and seeing what Courtland Sutton can do. That's what they need to be. That's what their identity is, whether they've recognized it or not. If they were to continue to make headway in doing all those things and finish the season on a 6-6 run and finish 6-10, I would argue, although I'm not crowning them, they still have a losing season. They didn't even get one game better. But I would say they turned the season around. To me, I think that's fair. So that's what the Broncos are kind of faced with now. When you start 0-4, how do you judge where you really are and what your progress is? And part of the problem that the Broncos have had, and this concerns me a little bit as we do this, is that the Broncos have had some difficulty looking in the mirror and being entirely honest about what they've seen. they have the orange-colored glasses on at times. That's to be expected. But the truth of the matter is, if you want to be a team like the Patriots, hey, Bill Belichick doesn't have the rose-colored glasses on. Make no mistake, Bill Belichick would cut Tom Brady if he thought it would make his team better. He's that bloodless. Now, that's the other extreme. I'm not sure that's a good thing. But being a little bit more towards the Belichick side of going, you know what? This isn't working. I'm going to do something else that's working. I'm going to make this move because it's the right move for the team. And not, boy, guys, I think we're close. We'll get it this time. As supposedly as much of a tough talker as he gets the somehow credit for, that's what Jerry Jones does, right? And that's why the Cowboys haven't done squat in forever. Because Jones does the same thing. Boy, we're so close. I love all the players we signed. I love all the players we drafted. We're so close. We're just a couple plays away here and there. We're going to be right there. And, of course, he's the guy that runs the whole show. Jerry Jones and John Elway, in their management style, are a little more alike than you think. They both talk a very big game. They're both very enthusiastic about their clubs, and those things aren't necessarily bad. But they also have a tendency of overvaluing their own players and overrating their own abilities. Now, they're hardly the only people on the planet that have that issue. A lot of us have that issue. Most of us have that issue. That's why it's important to surround yourself with people who you trust when they tell you you're making a mistake. And preferably, a lot of them. The Broncos have one of the smallest scouting departments in the league. One of the smallest player personnel departments in the league. It's one of the tricks. They simply may not have enough people that John Elway trusts that would tell him, hey, boss, I know you think you're doing the right thing here, but me and the guys and gals down in the meeting room, we talked about it, and we don't think that's right. People that he could go to and say, oh, you know what? I hadn't thought about that. Okay, let's talk about it. Let's make a good decision together. We know that that's the problem with Jerry Jones, right? Jones runs everything. He has yes men, and that's all he has. And that's why the Cowboys are constantly stuck in neutral. The Broncos are now constantly stuck in neutral. There are lessons to be learned for what happens with the Cowboys as to what happens with the Broncos and how it applies. But they did win this week, and they won this week because, well, they gave one of the favorite players on the team the rock more than they had before, and it worked like a charm. We'll continue to talk about how Philip Lindsay can change the Broncos' trajectory next. Oh, I know what Kevin's doing in the booth. Look at that. Going a little homegrown as we talk about what Philip Lindsay did for the Denver Broncos on Sunday. That's some next level stuff there, Kevin. I'm impressed. Thinking ahead. Philip Lindsay was terrific against the Chargers. I mean, that was what you wanted. Virtually every host at this station was saying you have to give the ball to Philip Lindsay more. The Broncos do lack explosiveness. They really have only a few explosive players on their team. Cortland Sutton and Philip Lindsay both stand head and shoulders above the rest. We know that Emmanuel Sanders can do it. A little older, though. But those are the guys. Lindsay had 19 touches, turned those 19 touches into 147 combined yards and a touchdown. Had a 32-yard run. Was a weapon all game long. The Chargers rushing as a team had 35 yards. Lindsay had 114 on the ground by himself. 7.6 yards a carry. Now, important to note every time we see these, don't give that all to Lindsay. Give the Broncos offensive line credit. There were some holes being opened yesterday. They were blowing the doors off of some guys. And this is a couple things for the Broncos. The Broncos actually do, and I will include Garrett Bowles in this, happily. The Broncos do have some really physical, bulldozing linemen. Bowles can be one of those guys. If Bowles' first step is forward because he's run blocking, he's a completely different guy. Dalton Reisner, you've already seen him as a rookie. You've seen what he can do. Dalton Reisner got a penalty for being a illegal man downfield because a pass dump off to Lindsay took a little bit too long because Reisner was already 15 yards downfield putting dudes on their butts. Those are the kind of... I turned to the folks watching it with me, and I was like, I will take that penalty every game. Like every single game. That's the kind of penalty I'm patting him on the back. So it was like, yeah, good job, big fella. Yeah, make that safety think about Reisner coming to you with a full head of steam from 10 yards upfield. I'm fine with that. But the Broncos have guys who can run block. It's totally different than pass blocking. And look, we have offensive linemen at the station, right? Go all the way to noon, all morning long at the Fan. You could hear from NFL offensive linemen. They'll tell you the same thing. And they'll tell you which one they like best. It's run blocking. You go get to push the other guy as opposed to them having pushing you.
Sean, I asked Orlando, quick story. I asked him, I said, when Tim Tebow came in, how was the locker room? As an offensive lineman, were you guys mad that you're going to have this guy running around? He goes, no.
It was fun.
He goes, we were all excited because we get to run the ball 50 times a game.
Right.
Offensive linemen love running the ball.
You like run blocking. You get to push the guy. Pass blocking, someone gets to push you. That's not fun. Who likes that? This Broncos team should be a run-first team. They should be their run. Look, they had 20 pass attempts, 32 carries. Great. I'm all for it. I don't think that's a sustainable ratio. I think you're going to have to pass more against better teams. I get that, but I'm all for it. It wouldn't bother me once if the Broncos had more rush attempts than pass attempts in a game, every game for the rest of the season. I'd love it. I'd tell you, you probably have a Broncos team performing close to what their maximum is if they're doing that. You have two very good running backs that do two very different things. Tough to scheme against. Lindsay and Freeman together had 175 yards rushing on 28 carries. They just wear teams down. And the beauty of that is Lindsay had 15 carries. They did a good job of picking his spots. Rich Gangarello did a very good job in this game. His opening drive script was as good as a drive as the Broncos have had in literally years. That's not a joke. It was really well designed, really well executed. Getting Lindsey the ball in space and not overusing him is going to be the biggest trick for the Broncos, and they nailed it on Sunday. They absolutely nailed it. Philip Lindsay can handle 19 touches a game and remain as explosive as he is at that rate of usage. He's not Christian McCaffrey. You can't run him into the wall. But he can handle 19. Philip Lindsay after this game is now 13th in the NFL in rushing. To which I'm sure, understandably, you're going, okay. But remember, Broncos don't have a bell cow back. Lindsay and Freeman have been splitting the carries. And by the way, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. The idea of everyone has an Emmitt Smith anymore, that doesn't happen. You don't LaDainian Tomlinson 38 carries to one guy. That's a bad idea. Doesn't work in the NFL anymore. They'll sniff it out. Having two backs with two different skill sets is ideal. The Broncos have that. Lindsay has 69 carries on the year. Freeman has 55. I think that's great. I'm all for it. But Lindsay is now 13th in the NFL in rushing. Now, out of those top 13 NFL rushers, however, Lindsay's 7th in the league in yards per carry, up at 4.7 now. This is the way the Broncos can be successful. They don't have to run him into the ground, but they do have to feed him because he's one of the few guys. It's not an apples to apples comparison, but when teams scout out the Broncos, they sit in the team room and go, okay, this is what most teams do. Is there a single guy on this team that if we don't pay attention will wreck us? Is there a Tom Brady that if we don't do the right things, Tom Brady alone will beat us? Is there a J.J. Watt or a Khalil Mack that if we do not pay attention to them, they will destroy everything we want to do and we will probably lose? Those kind of guys. Von Miller's one of those guys. Philip Lindsay isn't at that level. But the Broncos' offense not being as talented, he's the closest thing they do have. So right now, teams look, and Cortland Sutton is very promising, but Sutton hasn't done it. Lindsay's already done it. Lindsay made a Pro Bowl already. Right now, teams look at the Broncos' offense and say, okay, contain Lindsay. If we contain Lindsay, the rest of this team is pretty predictable. Even as good as Sutton is, we're only worried about Sutton wrecking our game if he's going 9 routes and Flacco's hitting him. That's what we're worried about. And he's not going to do that all game long because the Broncos' offensive line does not give Flacco enough time to let Cortland Sutton get 40 yards downfield. Flacco can throw it that far. But I've talked about this before, right? Guys are on a 4.4 40. Well, that's without pads and everything. In real life, and no one's pressing you or chucking you off the line either. But let's say generously, it takes Cortland Sutton 5 seconds to go 40 yards downfield in pads with a guy guarding him. You think the Broncos' offensive line has shown they can pass protect for 5 full seconds? Most lines can't. Even good lines generally can't. The Broncos, they're not. So teams aren't worried about Cortland Sutton breaking up the game by catching a bunch of deep passes. They're worried about stopping Philip Lindsay. The way the Broncos used him in this game was very near ideal. And they came away with a W for it. Vic Fangio had an opportunity to talk after the game to the media today down at the UC Health Training Center in Dove Valley following his first ever win. So we want to let you hear that next. Broncos coach Vic Fangio addressed the media down at the UC Health Training Center in Dove Valley following his first ever win. Now, That was Vic Fangio after his first win, the Broncos' first win of the year, 2013, over the Los Angeles Chargers. A lot there to hear about. We've talked about some of it earlier, the discussions about Von Miller, about Philip Lindsay, about the Broncos' new starters, apparently, Mike Purcell and Alexander Johnson. So a lot there for the Broncos change after this first game. We'll see if they can take it into Tennessee. A lot happened in sports, too. There were other NFL games that were very telling, including a loss by the Kansas City Chiefs to a team that, well, the Broncos will also get. So what could be learned from that? Plus a terrific day in baseball. All four playoff series coming in games today. And, oh, by the way, tomorrow, the Denver Nuggets will tip off their preseason. We'll talk all about those next. Feels good to have a win, doesn't it, Denver? Just a win. I know they're 1-4. I know. Blah, 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 blah. I'm not hearing that right now. I'm going to put my fingers in my ears for a day. I know what the reality is, but goodness, enjoy it, right? Sports are supposed to be fun. It's fun when they win. I don't get a check from the Broncos. Doesn't matter if I'm good at it or not. All I want to do is watch it and hope they win, and they did. It was fun. I liked it. More interesting, maybe, even than the Broncos win, not here, of course, but around the NFL, was the Chiefs' curious loss at home to the Indianapolis Colts last night. Patrick Mahomes threw for 321 yards again. He didn't throw a pick. He still had a quarterback rating of 91.9. It's not like he was bad, but they couldn't get anything going on the ground. Damian Williams had 23 yards. Mahomes himself had 17. He was their second leading rusher. LaShawn McCoy didn't even get a carry. He had 2 catches. I know they're dealing with some injuries, but Kelsey was definitely the focus for the Colts. He got 4 for 70. It's not like you contained him, really. Their leading receiver was Byron Pringle, which is kind of amazing. He had 103 yards and a touchdown, but all they could get was 13 points. Colts managed to get 19, and they did it in a way that, quite frankly, the Broncos might be able to emulate. Now, you don't want to look too far ahead. The Chiefs are 2 weeks away. And when you're 1-4, you don't even think about looking past the Tennessee Titans. Let's be realistic here. That would be really, really stupid. You can't presume they're going to win that game at all. You can't presume anything. You have to worry about the Titans. But we can look at the Chiefs game. We can look at the Colts game. Colts ran the ball. They ran a ball 45 times for 180 yards. Marlon Mack led the way 29 for 132. Mack had 132 yards at 4.6 carry. In comparison, Phillip Lindsay against the Chargers had 114 yards and 7.6 a carry. Now, of course, the Chargers are not as good as the Chiefs, but the Chiefs' defense is not impressive. Broncos understand, and I think every team understands, the Chiefs are not built on their robust steel curtain-esque defense. They're built on blowing the doors off you by scoring 35 a night. So the Broncos might have a lesson here. At home, maybe there's a window. I'm going to tell you right now, from my viewpoint, if the Broncos played this game 100 times on a computer, they probably win it 3 or 4. I don't think they're likely to win it. But if they are, the Colts might have just provided the blueprint. Best way to keep Patrick Mahomes from killing you is keep Patrick Mahomes on the sideline. There is a chance. Run the ball, eat the clock, force Mahomes into trying to score every time he gets out there. He may make mistakes. There's maybe a way to do that. That was an interesting result. It doesn't, to me, change the calculus at all. I still look at the Chiefs and the Patriots and say they're the 2 best teams in the AFC by a mile. Nothing's changed there. I didn't expect the Chiefs to go 16-0, but it was interesting. Looking around the league, of course, we got that great start on Thursday. That was fun following that terrific, entertaining game. We have our fan football pick'em. You can sign that up for that at 1043 The Fan. But you can still do it because we have weekly rewards. And I would have been a lot better. I was fine, but it would have been right near the tippy top, except for Greg Zerline had to shank it. But such is life. Interesting results. I mean, it was nice to see Josh Allen come back for the Bills. They knocked off the Titans in a low-scoring game. The Raiders surprised the Bears. That one surprised me. I know they're dealing with Chase Daniel at quarterback. They don't have Trubisky yet. But if you're the Broncos, you don't play the Raiders till the last game of the year. Josh Jacobs got 80 yards on you, roughly. Yeah, be happy. He's going to do better than that by the time he gets back. He put up 123 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground against the Bears defense. Yikes. Going to be really good. Saints go to 4-1 despite no Drew Brees. Pretty impressive stuff. Bridgewater, 314 yards and 4 touchdowns. The bloom came off the rose for the Giants a little bit there. Vikings sort of righted the ship. They looked good. They got the win on the road. Ravens looked pretty good against the Steelers, but the horrific hit to Mason Rudolph overshadowed the whole thing. Patriots actually had a tough time with Washington, only up 12-7 at halftime. But as things tend to do, well, they sorted themselves out. And Minshew Mania kind of came to an end. Christian McCaffrey went bonkers again. McCaffrey has 866 yards from scrimmage in the first 5 games of the year. Yikes. He was terrific. Panthers get that one 34-27. Give them credit. They are 3-1 since Cam Newton has left the team. Wow. Gardner Minshew, though, for his part, 374 yards and 2 touchdowns. Wasn't, chopped liver. Texans put up 53 on the Falcons. Another just explosive game. The Cowboys, the question, and I kind of poked at the Cowboys a little earlier. I admit, I enjoy it. I'll do it every chance I can get. Them and Notre Dame, every time. That's just something you can, if you equally are of the persuasion of not Cowboy and Fighting Irish fans, despite the fact I'm Irish, but you can enjoy that part of this program. I promise I will rather constantly pick on them every time I can. The Cowboys were maybe not what everyone thought they were. Packers came in and kind of beat them up. Dak Prescott threw for 463 yards, which sounds amazing. But by and large, when you throw for 400+ yards as a quarterback, most of the time you lose. Maybe if you're Mahomes, maybe if you're Drew Brees, but most of the time you lose. And then the Browns tonight, leading into our program here, looked horrible. Around the NFL, of course, Jay Gruden was removed. Fired this morning. Bill Callahan, former Raiders coach, is the interim head coach. Gruden himself said, I thought it might happen last week after the Giants game. So I think he was fully aware what was coming. Gruden's 5+ seasons is the longest any other coach has lasted in the 2 decades in which Snyder's owned the team. Yeah. Oh, well. Raiders get a little bit of reinforcements, apparently. ESPN's Chris Mortensen said the Bills will be trading wide receiver Zay Jones to the Raiders for a 2021 fifth-round pick. Not a bad return for a guy who I guess was a second-round pick in 2017. Just hasn't quite been as good as they had hoped up there in Buffalo, so the Raiders will give him a shot next. Over in baseball, of course, as I pointed out, a lot of exciting games. 4 elimination games today. Only one of them ended in elimination. That was tonight's game. The Yankees knock off the Twins in Minnesota to sweep that series. 5-1 is the final there. Otherwise, the Rays actually smoked the Astros, just beat up on Zach Greinke 10-3. They will play the game 4 tomorrow. And then on Wednesday, you will have 2 winner-take-all matches. The Cardinals toppled the Braves in extra innings. They'll go back to Atlanta for Game 5 on Wednesday. And the Dodgers will have to host the Nationals, who beat them 6-1 today. Max Scherzer held them to 5 hits, dealing through the rain. He looked great. And now the Nationals will travel to L.A. for a winner-take-all game there. Exciting stuff there. The Denver Nuggets will start their preseason tomorrow. They will do that against Portland. If you want to watch that game, you can. It's on ESPN. Hopefully you'll tune in and hear from us. We'll talk about that as well, too, as the Nuggets tip off what's expected to be a very, very impressive and interesting anticipated season. Thanks to Kevin in the booth, as always. Thanks to you for listening. Everyone who interacted on the Ramos Law text line, appreciate that. My name's Sean Drotar. This is The Fan Late Night, and this is Denver's best sports station, Sports Radio 104.3, The Fan.